This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. So what do you do? Information about getting involved in advanced technology careers, making everything from clean energy to life-saving medicine, is available at dreamitdoitvirginia.com. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
This Week in Richmond, and a welcome back to Senator George Barker. Appreciate your being on. We're in a window of time here in September leading up to a special session. Not too long after that, the 2015 session. So help our viewers understand some issues that you see as critical both now, things you're working on the studies, and issues that will roll on into, if not the short special session, into the next general session.
Right. Well, obviously, there's a lot of press coverage and media attention to what goes on when we're in session full time back in January, February, early part of March. And occasionally when we come down for short periods of time for a day or two with the full legislature meeting. But actually what doesn't get a whole lot of public attention is all the work going on behind the scenes during the year. Because between April and December, there's a lot of activity going on with different study commissions, different committees meeting on things, and a lot of that's happening right now. Just so happens I'm down today for a meeting that's dealing with the issue of what do we do with people with intellectual disabilities in Virginia. We've had some challenges. We still have challenges facing us, but I think we have some significant opportunities. There was a plan, a settlement reached with the Federal Department of Justice to propose moving towards trying to get more people, not in training centers, which are larger institutions for the most part, but more in community settings, in various group homes or intermediate care facilities, small intermediate care facilities, that type of thing, to have them more integrated into the community. There are some challenges to that because some of the people who are in the training centers now are people who have very severe physical disabilities as well as intellectual disabilities, and you've got to have the right services in the community. So Senator Newman put in a legislation this year to create a study commission to look at that and provide advice and input to the administration and to the General Assembly on how we move forward on that. And that, today will be the third of 4 meetings of that study group that has some legislators on it, but also a lot of advocates, family members of people who have intellectual disabilities, and others who are involved in the system one way or the other, to try to help us work through that in what's best services for people overall. So that's just one example of a number of things that we're working on there.
And another example, if you would be the mental health study that you're a part of, a meeting that, by the time our viewers are seeing this, the meeting will have occurred, but for you, it's next week.
Right, that's right. Yes, one of the things that happened this year, we did get, obviously was a lot of coverage after what happened with Senator Deeds and his family and son last year, with legislation that we worked on during the General Assembly session this year. And I worked closely with Senator Deeds and pulled together his bill and a number of other bills that I and some other people had put in, molded most of them into one major bill, and then we had a few smaller bills that I and others had in to sort of move us forward on things. And part of what Senator Deeds and I made clear all along was that that was not the end of it, that was just a first step, and I think we made some positive things that hopefully will never put a family in a situation that he ended up being in, where someone in a crisis doesn't get care. I think we put that to rest, so now anyone who's in a crisis situation will get a bed somewhere in Virginia. But what we want to do is a study commission was set up, and Senator Deeds carried that legislation as well, to do a full 4-year study of the entire mental health system, looking at it from a public side of what the state facilities, the local community services boards, and others do in providing mental health services, and also what the private sector does, and figuring out how we move Virginia forward in providing mental health services to everybody. Part of the problem we have now is that in much of Virginia, if someone doesn't have health insurance coverage, doesn't have coverage for mental health services as part of a health insurance package, if they have a problem and it's not a crisis, they don't get care. So either you're not bad enough off yet for us to be able to provide you services, and so if you come back if you get a crisis, and that's not the type of response that we should be having for people. So we're working on a number of things, and just started, in our second meeting will be occurring in September here to start to move that forward. I'm very pleased we have strong support from the administration. We have a new commissioner, Deborah Ferguson, with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. And they are actively engaged in working on problems for both people with intellectual disabilities and for the mental health side.
Through the years, even before 1998, when you began serving in the Senate, you've been working on health care issues. So in the broader sense, moving from the mental health area, what do you see? What's happening on health care?
Well, obviously the big challenge that we have for us is what we do for the 300,000 and 400,000 people who don't have health insurance coverage, who would be eligible if we took some action on things. Medicaid expansion, or what we did in the Senate this year, was we passed a private sector alternative to Medicaid expansion called Marketplace Virginia, to get these people into private health insurance plans covered by those plans that then, as they move forward, then could stay with the same plan, stay with the same company, and have private insurance provided separately through a health insurance exchange or through their employers or some other way. We have a substantial number of people in Virginia that don't have health insurance coverage. And unfortunately, even though we had over 200,000 Virginians sign up for health insurance coverage this past winter, a huge increase in the number of people getting coverage. We ended up that on a survey that was done in June of this year showed that Virginia was one of 3 states in the entire country that had an increase over the previous year in the number of people who are uninsured. And that's a direct result of what's happened to our economy in Virginia. We've often in the past been somewhat protected in terms of major downturns with recessions because of the significant federal influence in both Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. And actually more of the Hampton Roads economy is tied to the federal government than is Northern Virginia, which most people think is the opposite.
That's interesting, because most people do think it's the opposite.
And it's actually, it's a larger share of the economy in Hampton Roads than it is in Northern Virginia even. But because of the federal sequestration, there's been a significant reduction in jobs in both the Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia areas. And that has had a huge impact, and so we've actually had an increase in the number of people uninsured. At the special session we'll be having on the 18th and 19th of September, there will be discussion of that. I'm not optimistic that we're going to solve the problems at that point. The governors will, by the time this airs, will have come out with some announcement on options that he has available, and he may be able to implement some type of coverage on his own, and I think that's a legitimate option for him here. So we're going to continue to deal with this issue. There are major challenges, and it makes a difference to Virginians. First of all, it's good for our economy. We're sending money to the federal government already to pay for it. We're just not getting the benefits. And it has a huge detrimental impact upon people who don't have health insurance coverage. I dealt with a situation in my area a couple of years ago. An individual born in Virginia, raised in the community in Fairfax County, in the southeastern part of the county, ended up with hepatitis and worked at manual labor jobs where he didn't have health insurance coverage, needed a transplant. In the end, UVA said, we'll do the transplant, but we'll only do the transplant if you can get the medication so you don't reject the transplanted liver that you need. And he got turned down for Medicaid coverage because he was still working whenever he could. So he wasn't completely judged to be 100% disabled. So he couldn't get coverage through Medicaid and ended up dying because he did not have was not able to get access to the medications to keep his body from rejecting that liver, even though UVA was willing to provide do the transplant for free. So those are the types of real challenges that real people face here in Virginia, and we got to address that in some way.
So if it's not addressed on September 18, 19, is that an issue then for 2015?
Well, obviously, it will be an ongoing issue because it is a very important issue from from both sides and both perspectives as it relates to what we do in Virginia. And obviously, it's something that the governor will be looking at what his options are to do that. I understand he now has a report from Secretary Hazel on those issues, and we'll be hearing something soon from that, I'm sure. So.
We'll let our viewers know that we're having the conversation on September 5th.
Right.
So, as you said, they may have seen the governor's options, proposals, or whatever they're called by the time they're viewing this program.
That's correct.
Now, in our closing couple of minutes, are there other issues that you would like to mention to the viewers for 2015 that you think are going to be some of the hot ones?
Well, I think we do have some real challenges, and part of what we face right now is that this past year was the first year in history where the revenues that came into the state government went down at a time when the national economy was improving, and it was because of that sequestration that that was the major reason that we were negatively affected there. We have to, tackle that job, the responsibility of making sure that our economy is moving forward. Certainly, Governor McAuliffe has been very aggressive in moving forward on trying to bring additional jobs to Virginia and fill that in. But what it means is we're going to be facing some cuts in various programs and services, and we're not adequately funding either our K through 12 education or our higher education system right now. And we need to figure out how we're going to do that and how we're going to expand capacity, particularly on the higher education side, to ensure that all Virginians have a legitimate opportunity to get higher education services here in Virginia. So those are going to be some of the real challenges that we face going into the 2015 session and trying to figure out where we move forward as to the following biennium there.
What are you hearing from your constituents? What are they telling you? Senator Barker, here's something that we really want you to do.
The federal sequestration, since I represent parts of Northern Virginia and Alexandria, Fairfax, and Prince William counties, is a major issue. So that is something that does have a big impact, and addressing the economy is probably the #1 issue right now. There are a lot of other concerns, certainly the whole issue of health care coverage for people who don't have that and the impact that that's having on our economy and the potential to improve both the economy as well as the health of Virginians is important to a lot of people. People are pleased that we're starting to move forward on some of the transportation things because we did in 2013 pass the first major transportation bill in 27 years. So they're seeing some progress on that and are pleased with that. But we still have a ways to go in a lot of different areas there. And access to higher education is one of the critical issues that we face.
Senator Barker, thanks again for being on This Week in Richmond. We look forward to having you back on, certainly by the time the session gets underway in January of 2015. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Senator Steve Newman to This Week in Richmond. Appreciate your being on to help our viewers understand some of the issues that you're involved in right now in this time between the sessions. Right. And then after that, talk about some issues you see coming up. So what's keeping you on the road to Richmond and down here involved in different studies and meetings this summer?
Well, David, first, thank you, and thank you for your service. You've been sitting in that chair or one like it for longer than I've been here, and that's 24 years, actually getting information from this building out to the general public, and that's a great service that you provide, so thank you, and thank you for having me. What brings me to Richmond today, obviously, is my bill, which was Senate Bill 627, and that related to the issues of the training centers and the moving of individuals from those training centers out into the home-type settings. That's something that I've been very supportive of as far as transitioning those that can and should move from the institutional setting into the families. But David, as you know, there are limits to that. And when the federal government came in and really had a landmark decision against Georgia and then moved to Virginia, basically the ruling that we understood to come down was that you had to close all the training centers and move everyone into a community-based setting, whether or not that was going to be best for their life and their ability to operate or not. And obviously I was very concerned about that. We have a training center that is not in my district but close by, And I went about the way to make sure that these individuals had the best possible care, even if they're moved out or stay in an institution.
So that study's underway, and you expect some results to come from that study then before the session?
We hope to. I know that Senator Barker has become now a part of that study. Secretary Hazel has helped put this together. And the goal of it under the legislation is to find alternative means whereby a certain number of these training centers can remain open for those individuals that are most in need. And David, I know you know these individuals, but they truly are kind of the least among us. And if God sent us here to love and support any group of people who cannot take care of themselves, it's this group. So my hope is that we will find our way toward having as many people as can move into community, but then those individuals that I think would perish in that type of setting, a home setting, can find a way to stay into an institutional setting. And that's what we are going, I think, logically through, and I just hope the result will be a dual option for parents to make choices.
Other issues that you're working on here in the interim time?
Well, there has been some changes back and forth, and as you probably know, it looks like that I will become once again the chairman of the Transportation Committee, and that will add those responsibilities back to my plate. That was a position that we had before, and one that we take fairly seriously. I've worked very closely with Senator Deeds, who is the ranking member on the Democrat side, and he has been chairman and I've been chairman, and I think we work very well together. We look forward to those issues. There are a number of transportation issues that are coming forward this year. The whole question of taxi cabs versus Uber, if you will. There's a lot of debate on how that regulation should be formed. There is the question about how, what did we all call House Bill 2 last year, which really allocated the resources from Governor McDonnell's transportation package. There's a lot of revisiting that will go on there that will have big impacts on the Hampton Roads region, Northern Virginia, and the rest of the state as well.
You know, over the years we've heard about bridges in Virginia, so I imagine that even as those funds are allocated, the issue pertaining to bridge safety probably is one that we'll be addressing.
It is. You know, safety has got to be your number one issue. In other words, if you have a state system, clearly maintenance and bridges is important because it goes directly to that issue of safety. And when we had the bridge failures, especially in Indianapolis and St. Paul area, there have been devastating situations. Every bridge in Virginia has been re-rated. And in a lot of those cases, the re-rating has meant that commerce in certain parts of Virginia that carry heavy loads has simply stopped, and we've moved them in other areas. One of the functions of an operable transportation system is to ensure that our goods and services can move on an ingress and egress basis. And that's an item that we have to look at. How are we doing on our bridges, and are they safe, and are they capable of transporting Virginia goods?
And I suppose the tunnels too, and tunnel safety is a big issue out. As many of our viewers may know, out in the western part of the state, just a fire by, I think, a tractor trailer catching on fire in a tunnel just, fortunately, I guess, didn't do major damage to the tunnel. Maybe didn't do any at all, but it really just shut down commerce for almost a full day.
It did, and you see that, and the potential for that occurring in the eastern part of Virginia is also very important to us. I mean, the eastern port is a big economic driver for this state. It is a deep water port that we can get goods in and out of, and the ability to have multiple routes to do that, both by traffic roads and also by rail, is very important, and it's something that we're going to continue to take a strong look at.
You know, we've been fortunate that we haven't had, to the time, at least September 5th, when we're having this conversation, there have not been hurricanes that have really been hitting Virginia. But I know that the transportation committees, along with the governor and his cabinet secretary, look at ways, how would you evacuate people? I think a report came out just recently saying that Richmond may not have enough sites right now to help people if there had to be some significant evacuation.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of concern about if the big one ever came, could you get the people out? You know, would the roads become too clogged, and what other opportunities could you have to move people out of that region? And it still remains a problem. I think if it happened today, we would certainly test the limits of what could occur as far as the evacuation process. there are a number of items that you know are going through the public-private partnership that will build roads that will help ease that situation. But that's a pretty big commerce driver down that way, and we need to make sure we do everything we can to support the infrastructure there.
You know, you referenced the chair of the Transportation Committee, that you'd be certainly expected to be in that position again. Help our viewers understand some of the extra responsibilities that chairs have of committees, because you've been chair and you've not been chair. You've
Right.
seen it from both sides.
Well, fortunately, we work very well in that committee on a bipartisan basis. So Senator Puckett and I would always invite him to what we call the chairman's meeting. So early in the week, normally on Mondays, we will sit down, we'll go through everything on the docket. I think I have a responsibility to understand every bill in great detail, and the agencies are there to inform me about those bills. From that, working with the ranking member on the Democrat side, I end up putting together an agenda that helps us move through the workload. I had found when I took over that position that we were taking 4 to 5 meetings to get through our work, and I thought we could do that in 2 to 3 meetings. We've actually accomplished that over and over again, getting it done, I think, more efficiently, and that's working with the Democrats to move legislation through. We make sure every bill is heard, and no bills are put in the chairman's pocket, if you will, in that committee. We hear everything, go through the process. We've decided not to use subcommittees very much because we don't want to debate things twice, right. And the detailed information can normally be worked out ahead of time. So I think the committees from both Senator Deeds and I have operated very efficiently, and we're very pleased about that. You
represent a significant, major portion of Central Virginia. Yeah. What do you hear from your constituents when they say, Senator Newman, we want you to do this, or we want you to do that? What are they encouraging you to do as you prepare to come back for the 2015 session? Right.
You know, David, that's important. In my area, we have gone about the process recently of setting up a new office actually in the Botetourt-Roanoke County area, because it's just far enough away from the Bedford area that we need to make sure that constituents can come in, and we've actually hired a staff that's going to sit in the Botetourt area to help make sure that they aren't having to travel so far to reach their state senator, as my district now goes from Craig County, the West Virginia line, all the way to Lynchburg, and so it's a lot of area and includes a large chunk around Bedford. So for me, that constituent service really matters, and as we've seen, Governor McAuliffe has not been kind of an agenda-driven governor. In other words, he didn't come in saying, I want to accomplish these items, a large set of items. So we've not had that direction from the top, which is okay. Governors can pick their own way. Governor McDonnell had an agenda for every year and really hammered on those items and got a lot done. But I think it's more of a constituent, and from the General Assembly is becoming the momentum as opposed to coming down from leadership from the governor today. So I think we'll see more of those local issues driving the agenda in the General Assembly, and maybe fewer of those larger, big issues coming down from the administration.
You know, you began your service back in 1992 in the House of Delegates for a couple of terms, and in the Senate in 1996 That's right. to now. It's a significant time in the history of the Commonwealth. Any reflections on how you perceive things as a 20-some-year-old back in the House, and changes that you have seen? If your constituent said, Senator Newman, what has changed in the time you've been in the General Assembly? What comes to mind?
Well, a lot has changed. My first governor when I came down was Doug Wilder, and my last governor, of course, is Governor McAuliffe. And Virginia has changed. I think the makeup of Virginia, especially in Northern Virginia and Eastern Virginia, has changed. The dynamics of what it means to be a Republican versus a Democrat have somewhat changed. More national type Democrats now, more national type Republicans. That was not the way it was when I first got here. You'll remember Richard Holland and Virgil Goode. They may have been Democrats, but we all felt generally the same way about Virginia. A little more partisanship, following a little bit of Washington a little bit. But you know, the one thing about Virginia that has stayed the same is that I think that when you get to the floor of the Senate, the good of Virginia is on everyone's mind. And when you get into the budgetary process, I've sat through those conference committee meetings where you're actually working out the differences. And if we are going to add the program, we're always subtracting a program. So it's always a balanced budget. And when it comes to the good of Virginia, I think Republicans and Democrats work very well together.
Senator Newman, thank you so much for being on This Week in Richmond. We look forward to having you back.
Thanks, David. Thank you for your work.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. So what do you do? Information about getting involved in advanced technology careers, making everything from clean energy to life-saving medicine, is available at dreamitdoitvirginia.com. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.